Okay. Okay. Hey guys. Hey. Hi. Just want to say hi.
I can't say too much as yet, but I'm going to be spending a lot more time in here with you lot because I love it in here. I fucking love it!
It doesn't care about what you're craving. It just releases at a particular rate. Biases us towards action. In fact, it's fair to say that dopamine is responsible for wanting and for craving. And that's distinctly different from the way that you hear it talked about normally, which is that it's involved in pleasure. So yes, dopamine is released in response to sex. It's released in response to food. It's released in response to a lot of things, but it's mostly released in anticipation and craving for a particular thing. It has the effect of narrowing our focus for the thing that we crave. And that thing could be as simple as a cup of coffee. It could be as important as a big board meeting. It could be a big final exam. It could be the person that we're excited to meet or see. Dopamine doesn't care about what you're craving. It just releases at a particular rate. In fact, if we just take a step back and we look at the scientific data on how much the dopamine firing increases in response to different things, you get a pretty interesting window into how your brain works and why you might be motivated or not motivated. Let's say you're hungry, or you're looking forward to a cup of coffee, or you're going to see your partner. Well, your dopamine neurons are firing at a low rate until you start thinking about the thing that you want or the thing that you're looking forward to. Let's say you're craving chocolate or a good meal, steak if you like steak, or a nice plate of pasta if you like pasta. When you eat that food, the amount of dopamine that's released in this reward pathway goes up about 50% above baseline. The neurons there go from firing, 3 or 4 times per second to, 6 or 10 times per second. It really depends, and these aren't exact numbers, but if we were to measure the amount of dopamine that's released, it goes up about 50%. All right? Sex, which is fundamental to our species.
I don't need it. I don't need it. I don't need it. I need it!
Continuation and reproduction, although it doesn't have to be for conceiving children. Sex does release dopamine, and it increases dopamine. The diabolical part about dopamine is that because it didn't evolve in order to get you to indulge in more and more and more of something, what happens is that initially you experience an increase in pleasure.
That's really good.
And you also experience this increase in pain shortly after, or woven in with the pleasure, that makes you want more of that thing. But with each subsequent time that you encounter that thing, that you pursue the chocolate, that you pursue the lover, each time the experience of dopamine release and pleasure is diminished a little bit. And the diabolical thing is that the pain response is increased a little bit. And this is best observed in the context of drug-seeking behavior. The first time someone decides to take cocaine or amphetamine, they may do it out of boredom. They may do it out of peer pressure. They may do it to relieve some internal sense. Maybe they're bored, or they're just excited. Maybe they're high in novelty seeking. There are a lot of reasons why people might try a drug. Far too many for us to get into or parse here. Maybe they don't even want to do it, but someone encourages them. They will experience a huge dopamine release, and they will feel likely very good. However, the next time they take it, it won't feel quite as good, and it won't feel even as good the third time or the next time. But the amount of pain, the amount of craving that they experience for the drug will increase over time. So much of our pursuit of pleasure is simply to reduce the pain of craving. So the next time you experience something you really like, I don't want to take you out of that experience, but it's really important that you notice this, that if there's something you really enjoy, part of that enjoyment is about the anticipation and wanting of more of that thing. And that's the pain system in action. I won't tell you what to do in order to overcome all kinds of procrastination, but from a logical perspective, it makes sense, therefore, for those kinds of people to think about other ways that they can get their system into activation. I've talked about this in previous podcasts, but a couple of those tools might be what we've called superoxygenation breathing, which I admit is not always super oxygenating. So this would be, if you didn't want to consume anything, this could be 25 or 30 cycles of deep inhales and exhales. It's likely to create some anxiety and low-level stress. If you're someone who's prone to panic attacks, I wouldn't recommend this, but it's pretty straightforward. It will deploy adrenaline into your system, and you will find that your visual field is focused, and you will be able to work and focus better than if you just kind of waited around for some wave of motivation to wash over you. Normally, you're waiting for that deadline to come into sight, and then that's what the stimulus is. But you can self-direct adrenaline release without ingesting anything. You can also ingest coffee, caffeine, or mate or something like that, which is what I prefer very often to coffee, which has caffeine. Caffeine does release dopamine at low levels. How much it releases dopamine isn't clear. It seems to increase firing in these neurons in the nucleus accumbens by about 30%, which is a pretty low level, but it can create agitation. So for caffeine-sensitive people, that could be a problem. I've talked before about things like L-tyrosine, the precursor to dopamine, or mecunopurines. I talked about that in the last episode, but if you didn't see that, just to remind you, L-tyrosine is present in red meats. It's in certain nuts, and L-tyrosine is the precursor to dopamine. You can supplement L-tyrosine if you like. You will get a big inflection in dopamine, but there is a crash associated with it. However, it will increase motivation in the short term. The biology of sex in males and females, doesn't matter if it's XX chromosome, XY chromosome, XXY, XYY, doesn't matter. The reality is that dopamine is released on anticipation and consummation of sex and reproduction. And after orgasm, regardless of chromosomal background, there's a dramatic decrease in dopamine and an increase in a hormone called prolactin. Now, prolactin is associated with milk letdown in lactating mothers. It's also present in males. And in general, prolactin creates a sense of lethargy, of stillness, and lack of desire to move, and lack of desire to pursue more of whatever released the dopamine. Prolactin, in fact, sets the refractory period on a male's ability to mate again. Now, this is going to vary tremendously from individual to individual. It also can, there are data showing that it can vary tremendously from mate pairing to mate pairing. The number one thing that releases dopamine is novelty. And it is true that the refractory period is shortened by the introduction of novel mates. This was first shown in a kind of classic experiment in, of all things, in chickens. This is called the Coolidge effect. And the story goes, and I believe it's a true story, it's actually in all the neuroendocrinology textbooks, so I believe it's true, is that President Calvin Coolidge was visiting a chicken farm. It's being taken around, and the person who was hosting the visit showed them a rooster. That was Coolidge and his wife were on the visit, and said, "This rooster copulates thousands of times per day." And Mrs. Coolidge apparently kind of elbowed President Coolidge and said, you hear that? Kind of like pointing out the prowess of this rooster. Now, the reading of the book, the kids always seem to ask one more time, one more. They seem to want more of the things that they enjoy, but really engaging with them in a way that increases their sense of pleasure for what's right there, as well as giving them a lot of things to be excited about and positive anticipation. Now, having worked years ago with at-risk kids and also with young kids at summer camps and things like that, one of the things that you learn is you never say maybe to a kid about a reward. If you say we might have ice cream later, you are essentially saying we are having ice cream. They don't hear the maybe part. And it turns out adults don't either. It's really interesting. There's something called reward prediction error. I've talked about this before, but I haven't really talked about it deeply in the context of the dopamine system. Dopamine, as I've said, is involved in anticipation of wanting, not of having. It's involved in motivation toward the thing that you want, and it biases us towards action. Reward prediction error equals the actual amount of dopamine that's released in response to something versus minus the amount that's expected, okay? So if you tell a kid, we might have ice cream, they hear, we're going to have ice cream, and they expect it. And if you later say, well, we're not going to have ice cream, and I said maybe, that's actually going to lead to a much bigger crash in dopamine. It's going to lead to a negative signal, a punishment signal. It's literally going to feel like pain. So kids, you can leverage this. If your parents say maybe, they're effectively telling your dopamine system absolutely. Now, adults are like this too. If we think something might happen and it doesn't happen, there's a big crash in our affect, in our emotionality. And that's because that dopamine system goes from firing about 3 to 4 times per second to about 10 or 15 times per second in the possibility that something might happen. There's something that you're pursuing in life, whether or not it's an academic goal or a financial goal or a relationship goal. One of the things that you can do to ensure that you will remain on the path to that goal for a very long time and that you will continue to exceed your previous performance, as well as continue to enjoy the dopamine release that occurs when you hit the milestones that you want to achieve, is to occasionally remove rewards subjectively. Let's say you set out a goal of making, I'm going to make this quantitative with respect to finances because it just is an easy description, but this could also be in sport, this could be in school, this could be in music, could be in anything, creative endeavors. But let's say you set out a certain financial goal, or let's say you want to get a certain number of followers on whatever social media platform. As you reach each one of those goals, you should know now that the amount of dopamine is not going to peak. It's actually going to diminish and make you
how easy
crazy.
This is for me? Do you have any fucking idea how easy this is? This is a fucking joke. And I'm sorry you can't do this. I really am, because I wouldn't have to fucking sit here and watch you fumble around and fuck it up.
The key to avoiding that crash, but to still keep it in healthy levels that will allow you to continue your pursuit, is as you are staircasing toward your goal, maybe that's dollars, maybe that's followers, maybe that's grades, maybe that's some other metric, it's medals or trophies, you actually want to blunt the reward response for some of those intermediate goals. Now, I'm not telling you shouldn't celebrate your wins, but I'm telling you not to celebrate all of them. Or as a good friend of mine who recently, fortunately for him, had a great financial success, he asked me and somebody else, a good friend of mine who's very tuned into dopamine reward schedules, understands how they work at a really deep level. And he said, I don't know what to do next. And we said, oh, well, that's simple. You should just give most of it away. And this wasn't a ploy to receive any of the money ourselves. This was really about reducing the impact of that reward. Now, hopefully giving him money away, if you already have enough of it, would be something that was rewarding in and of itself.